All right, the app I made is a Metronome application for the Android platform. I made it with Android Studio, completely in Java and XML. And a metronome is a tool for musicians, if you don't know what it is. And it produces regular ticks. And you can change the beats per minute. The original, as you can see in the picture, was a mechanical device. You winded it up, and it had a pendulum that swung back and forth and would produce a click. And you can adjust the beats per minute that produced. And so basically, it's recreating this device with some additional features in software. Um, it seems like an easy task, but we have to realize that Android isn't a real-time operating system. So kind of the naive approach that if you look on Stack Overflow for, I guess, beginners making a metronome, they will try to use timers or they'll try to pull the system nanotime to wake up a thread at a certain time to play a sound. And that approach is not going to produce a very steady click because there's lots of latency involved. When you wake up a thread at a certain time, it might wake up, 200 milliseconds after the fact. If you're pulling, you're also using a lot of overhead. And also, whenever you play a sound, uh, there's some latency when you send it to the audio driver through the Android system and so on. So that's not a very good approach. The best approach is to use a low-level API, which my app used Audio Track, which is available in Java. You could also use OpenSLES through JNI in C++ or C. I didn't really need to use that because Java was sufficient. It's a low level API. You basically are writing to a buffer that's continuously playing. So you're buffering a certain amount of sound. So there's no latency involved in when you're playing the sound. The trick is just creating the sound. Basically, sometimes you're filling in zeros, sometimes you're filling in actual sounds to produce the tick. And I want to use sampled sounds for the app. I didn't want to create sine waves or square waves or something that sounded like crap to produce the sounds. I wanted to use like an actual sampling of a wood block or a clave or something like that, a bell or something like that that sounded real as opposed to computer generated. My version now, it just has one sound, 2 to 3 weeks to make the app, so it only has one sound. In the final version, you'll be able to change the sounds. You'll have, maybe a dozen different sounds you could set it to. And another objective was to make it very easy to use, no complication. That seems to do well in the Play Store. Don't make something that takes people any amount of time to figure out how to use. Make it real straightforward. For the app I made right now, the features are I can adjust the BPM, I can adjust the beats per bar. It accents the first beat of every measure, and you can also set the subdivisions of the beat. You can adjust all this while it's running. The code adapts to the new values. It also has a feature where you can tap the tempo in if you're listening to music. It's a fairly common feature on metronomes. You could tap the pulse, and it'll adjust the BPM to what the pulse of the song is. And obviously, we only had 2 to 3 weeks to make the app, so I'm going to add many more features before I release it, most likely. I also want to have synchronized visual indicators. You'll see that how that works when I demonstrate it. And I didn't want to do any kind of high CPU things like poll system time. I started out doing that, polling system time, in order to show the visual events at the right time. However, that's a high overhead operation if you're just continuously polling you're basically using 100% CPU usage, which is going to kill a battery, use a whole core, so that's no good. So we want to do it a different way with the visual indicators. And I also want to run on any device with Android 4.0 or higher. So the history of this app is I have an app on the Google Play Store that's fairly popular. It's for musicians, and I keep seeing under users also installed different Metronome apps. So I figured why have them install someone else's Metronome app when I can make one in a few weeks and have them install mine, and they get to see more of my ads and so on. And of course, there's dozens of Metronome apps on the store already. It's a pretty easy thing to make. Some of them probably don't work very well, so we have an improvement there. Some of them do, of course. But I could leverage my existing app to get installs. You can use in-house ads in my existing app. And they're going to see also by developer, they're going to see my app, my Metronome app, which they wanted to install anyway. So you get some installs there. So this is kind of the skeleton of how the app is constructed. We have an activity, and I used the app compat library, so you run on 4.0 or higher with all the material design UI features. The activity doesn't do much of anything. It just holds the fragment. It's always better to start coding with a fragment in case you ever want to move it somewhere else or do something else with it. I learned my lesson with another app that if you start doing things in the activity and you want to be able to swap it with something else, with another fragment, you kind of have to go and fix everything. It's better just to start off with a fragment, put everything in the fragment. And this is kind of just a skeleton. There's more to it than these members here, but we have a floating action button, some number pickers to select those different settings. And as you can see, the line going to the Metronome service, I use a library called Event Bus, which basically simplifies communicating between fragments, activities, and services. There's ways to do it in Android with like intents or binding the service, both of which are overly complicated and have all kinds of problems unless you account for them. So I use this library that simplifies it very dramatically. And you could basically you could post an event. It's a publish subscribe library. So you post an event, which could be any Java object basically, and then the subscriber will respond to it. Very simple. So basically the Metronome fragment is a view controller. So all it does is change the view or receive the input from the user. And then it posts commands to the service, the Metronome service, which is a subclass of service, obviously. And the service, all the service really does is control a plain old Java object called Metronome. There's only one of those in the service. It's composition. And the Metronome manages the audio track, and it manages the thread, which actually does the creating the generating the sound and playing it. And the Metronome, when you're filling up the buffer to write to the audio track, and you can see the buffer is a short array. These all shorts, and I used mono as opposed to stereo samples, so everything's real simple. So 16-bit samples, so a short is 16 bits, so it works out evenly. So you can't you can't signal where there's a beat in the metronome directly because there's latency. It's a fairly large buffer with audio track because it has to account for the garbage collector running, which could take 500 milliseconds or something. So you have to have a fairly large buffer. So you can't just directly say, okay, now there's a beat, the metronome fragment should update itself. So you have to have some kind of calculate where the beat will be presented in time as opposed to when you're writing it to the buffer. So for that, I just used a handler with post delayed, and I'll show you a little of this later. And I calculated the time from the total amount of shorts I'd written to the buffer minus where the playback head position is of the audio track, which is a function of audio track. So you can calculate how much time should elapse between right now and when the visual indicator should change. So it's basically posting those what I call beat events at a certain delayed amount of time, and then the metronome fragment receives that and runs some code that updates the UI at the right time. Now, at the beginning, I mentioned that it wasn't a good idea to set timers and so on in order to generate the sound, which I'm not doing. But for the visual indication, I didn't see any other way of doing it. So it's I haven't actually measured the amount of jitter it's going to have, but it's going to be, a few milliseconds off. I mean, the screen's only updating 60 times a second, so there's 16 milliseconds of jitter right there. It's not going to be perfect, but it'll be good enough for jazz, as they say. So without further ado, I guess I'll demonstrate the app on the emulator. And as you can see here, the visual indicators at the top of the beat. Right now, we accent the first beat. Eventually, we'll add features to either make silent beats that don't play anything or accent other beats. These will be clickable. And right now, you can increase the number of beats per bar, basically, up to 16. And it accents the first one. So I'll hit play. I'm 107 BPM and 1 click per beat currently. So as you can see, it's a very regular click, and that's 107 BPM. You can adjust the BPM right here. Slow it down a good amount. We also get the classical notation for the BPM. And we can increase it. So that's the basic function, and then we can turn off the visualization and adjust the BPM with a number picker as well for a little more finer adjustment. We can increase the clicks per beat, which you can hear, you get that subdivision. So you can also do kind of like obscene things and put 16 subdivisions, which could be useful if you're doing a really slow tempo. And then here's the tempo tap, and it's easier to do the tempo tap when you're not playing. So what you'd want to do is get some.
I let it go back to when we played as kids, but things changed. That's the way it is. Come on, come on.
That's just the way it is. Things will never be the same. That's just the way it is. Oh yeah.
So that song's at around 111 BPM. So that's about what the tempo of that song was. And now I'm going to splice in some of it running on two actual devices. And I think the first device has some, it drops the visual indication sometimes. It's not something that's actually happening. It's part of the screen recorder is just lagging out or something. So this is running the device on a Moto X Pure 2015 edition. It's a fairly high-end device, 6-core, lots of RAM. I think a 5.7-inch screen with Android 6.0. I think the sound is going to be a little delayed because it's recording through a microphone, but you can get an idea. That's 70 BPM. Visualization. Increase the speed a little bit. Change the beats per bar. Change the clicks per beat. And you have it running in the background with a notification. We can go back into the app or stop it directly from there. Okay, this one's recorded on the video camera because there's no good screen recorder app for Android 4.1 apparently without root access. This is a old LG phone. It's running Android 4.1. It only has like a 3.7-inch screen, I believe. But the app doesn't use very much CPU. It's only a single core CPU, but it runs fine because there's nothing heavy going on. You can see it's not quite ideal with the screen size because we get scroll bars in this case. But it's not a big deal. It's not many devices actually have a 3.7-inch screen anymore, so. Everything runs fine. We can increase the speed.